Good evening, everyone. I am happy to see so many of you here tonight. It seems like a very nice opportunity for reflection and deepening of topics that, as you will see, will captivate us, because we are talking about today, the theme of today, the challenges we have to face every day. I am Cynthia Bricky. I am the president of the Cultural Association Ingenua Aldanza, which organized the event. It is an entity that was born in Piacenza in 2009. It's been 16 years now. From the initiative of a group of friends driven by the desire to discover and verify, according to the expression of Pope Benedict XVI, how the contribution of Christians is decisive only if the intelligence of faith becomes the intelligence of reality. We are interested, indeed, in engaging with a Christianity that allows us to enter into reality and to love and see it for what it is. Therefore, the association is committed to a constant work of deepening judgment on what happens at both the national and local levels. Tonight, we are here to present a book that we believe offers stimuli and points for reflection precisely in this sense. And we have two prominent speakers whom I thank, first of all, for accepting our invitation and for their availability. Let me introduce them. We have Luciano Violante, a former magistrate and member of the Chamber of Deputies. He was a member of the Chamber of Deputies from 1979 to 2008, where he served as president of the Parliamentary Anti-Mafia Commission from 1992 to 1994, and as president of the Chamber from 1996 to 2001. Today, he chairs the Foundation for Probable Futures, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the development of human capital. This foundation operates in the field of innovation, promoting the integration of technological skills and humanistic knowledge, and engages with the needs and perspectives of younger generations. I would like to mention something I found interesting on the Foundation's presentation website, which says this: it seems very aligned with tonight's theme. We live in the age of uncertainties. And when there is uncertainty, the courage for big decisions is lacking. This is also a point of inspiration for tonight's event. And then we have Julián Carrón, a priest, theologian, university professor of theology at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan, former president of Communion and Liberation for 16 years, and author of numerous books. And particularly, regarding the book that we will present this evening, which is Living in Our Time, Living Without Fear in the Age of Uncertainty. He is one of the three figures interviewed by Geraldine, who is the author, along with James Taylor, one of the greatest philosophers of our century, and Rowan Williams, an Anglican bishop and British theologian. Moreover, he was also the Archbishop of Canterbury. So before moving on to the theme of the evening, I would like to thank the authorities present, and especially the mayor, Katia Tarasconi, who has allowed us to organize the event in collaboration with the municipal administration by providing us with this beautiful location of the monumental hall of Palazzo Gotico, and to whom I ask to say a few words. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to be here tonight to participate in this important occasion for reflection and dialogue. The interview book that we have the opportunity to explore together today, Living in Our Time, Living Without Fear in the Age of Uncertainty, indeed addresses themes that are as fundamental as they are urgent. In an era marked by global challenges, economic and social difficulties, and growing uncertainty, reading this text invites us to reflect on our role, our choices, and our way of living in the present and building the future. The words of the authors, three highly esteemed individuals who generously offered their enlightened perspective on our reality. The Spanish theologian Carrón, the Canadian philosopher Taylor, and the Anglican Archbishop Williams confront us with the necessity of a deep reflection on our being as citizens, women and men, in a rapidly changing society. This is an invitation not only to better understand our time, but also to respond with courage and awareness to the challenges it presents to us. As the mayor of the city of Piacenza, I particularly feel the value of these moments of dialogue that allow our community to grow, to open up to new perspectives, and to strengthen the dialogue between institutions, culture, and civil society. In a time like ours, it is essential that spaces for reflection, like tonight's, become increasingly numerous so that our community can face future challenges with greater serenity and awareness. A heartfelt thanks goes to the Cultural Association, Ingenua Baldanza, for organizing this evening and for giving us the opportunity to listen to authoritative voices like that of Professor Luciano Violante, Emeritus President of the Chamber of Deputies, and of Father Julián, forgive me if I get it wrong, Carrón, theologian and lecturer at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan, who will undoubtedly contribute to enriching our thoughts. In closing my greeting, I would like to once again thank all the speakers for the high value they bring to this discussion and wish all of us an evening of enrichment, dialogue, and above all, hope. Thank you.
Thank you for these words that I would say introduce this evening very well. We now delve into the heart of the topic that interests us, which will be a series of questions I will pose to the two guests aimed at exploring the contents of this interview book, the result of a dialogue developed by three great personalities whose contents were presented in a documentary film shown at the Rimini meeting in 2021. I wanted to make a very brief introduction because I need to explain why the Association Ingenua Aldanza is presenting this text to you and why we wanted to propose this evening. So where does the interest in delving into the topics we will discuss here come from? Well, the work on this text stems from a challenge that Pope Francis presented to us a few years ago. It was 2015, at a meeting in Florence with the representatives of the Fifth National Convention of the Italian Church. And on that occasion, he said, one could say that today, we are not living in an era of change, but rather a change of era. The situations we are experiencing today therefore pose new challenges that are sometimes even difficult for us to understand. Our time requires us to live problems as challenges and not as obstacles. The Lord is actively at work in the world. And indeed, in this speech, he introduced for the first time this theme of a change of era, which he then revisited. The expression in 2019 in a speech to the Roman Curiae, where allow me to read the passage because it will really help us delve into the theme of the evening. What we are experiencing, ngoda, is not simply an era of changes, but a change of era. We are therefore in one of those moments where changes are no longer linear, but epochal. They constitute choices that quickly transform the way of living, relating, communicating, and processing thought, interacting between human generations, and understanding and living faith and science. It often happens that we experience change by merely putting on a new outfit and then actually remaining as we were before. The healthy attitude is rather to allow oneself to be questioned by the challenges of the present time and to grasp them with the virtues of discernment, parrhesia, and hypomone. In this case, change would take on a completely different aspect. From being a peripheral element, a context or a pretext, an external landscape, it would become increasingly human and also more Christian. It would still be an external change, but one accomplished from the very center of man. That is an anthropological conversion. I wanted to make this preamble precisely to capture the impetus with which we approach the dialogue of this evening, which, as I mentioned, will be structured around questions, and I will start right away with the first one. So, as I was saying at the beginning, Pope Francis, when speaking about our time, says that it is not an era of changes, but a change of era. I ask our two guests, how do you interpret this expression? Do you agree with it? What characteristics does this time of ours have for you? I would start with Professor Violante.
Well, good evening. I must say that I feel a certain shyness speaking in this extraordinary place, which, so to speak, is a sign of a culture that, though distant from us, is always present because works of art are always present. First of all, it is not the first time in the history of humanity that we face a change of era. When St. Augustine wrote The City of God, he referred to the Visigoth invasion of Rome, the destruction of Rome by the Visigoths, and he had to counter the arguments of the pagans who accused the Christians of being responsible for what happened because they had essentially weakened the protection of the gods over Rome. Augustine wrote, I believe it was 12 volumes, if I remember correctly, to explain what was happening. Beyond the Sepe civilization of sin and the destruction that was in Rome, it is necessary to build the civilization of God. Then perhaps even the discovery of America marks a change of era. That ocean which was water became a bridge. Perhaps the invention of movable type printing marked another change of era because it transitioned from scrolls, generally made in monasteries or palaces, to written texts. Here, the upper middle class, which previously could not access them, could now do so. And gradually it extended to different social classes. So I mean, this is not the first time humanity has completely changed its characteristics. However, the things that Pope Francis was saying, I believe, referred in particular to what was happening in the digital realm, in a way. So much so that he recommended on that occasion that priests give short sermons, saying that everyone is now used to brief things, and if you speak for more than 15 or 20 minutes, no one listens anymore. Something that later turned out to be true. As is the spirit of this pontiff, which is, so to speak, to link the more serious things with the somewhat softer ones. So what is the epochal change we are experiencing? And how do we position ourselves in relation to this epochal change with the help of this book? First of all, the boundaries are being questioned Look, when the boundaries of parts of the world are being questioned, it means that something profound is changing. Trump wants Greenland, he wants Panama, he wants Canada. Russia wants to take over Ukraine. Israel wants to eliminate the Palestinians in Gaza. It's all a matter of boundaries. These are also the boundaries between the human and the technological. To what extent will digital replace humans? Will artificial intelligence replace humans? Will there come a time when it takes this place or not? And so all these things mark a change of era. It's a different era. It's a different time that we are living in. So how do we position ourselves in relation to this change of era? First of all, let's look at what's around us. If any of you feel like looking at your phone, usually we are encouraged not to look at the phone when we, however, if someone wants to do it, there is an extraordinary painting called The Ascent to Calvary. Now I'll tell you the author, naturally due to my age, it escapes me at the moment. It's Gregory the Elder who painted this extraordinary painting in the mid-1500s, where on the left you can see a crowd of knights returning from a hunt coming down, a lot of people, children playing in the square. There is only the mother of Jesus with some friends at the bottom right, crying. Jesus is not visible. He is, how to say, drowned in the crowd. Moreover, looking closely, Jesus is the only one walking, while the other two are on a cart. At the top right is Golgotha. What does this painting mean? Something is about to happen that will shock the world. Jesus is about to be killed, but no one notices. No one is understanding the moment they are living in. So I always comment on this painting at the beginning of my lessons because I say, look, we must pay attention to what happens around us, as sometimes extraordinary things happen around us that we do not realize. One of the extraordinary things happening is the destruction not only of people, but of libraries, schools, universities, kindergartens, the places where the culture of humanity resides, both in Ukraine and in Gaza. And look, a new word has been invented. This word is domicidio, not homicide, but domicidio. When buildings are torn down. You see, when a library, a school, a hospital, a kindergarten, a university is destroyed, the memory of a people is destroyed. What that people have built over time is destroyed. And we are living in a phase where wars are fought not between equal forces. Because when forces are equal, the principle of deterrence prevails. Deterrence means that I do not go beyond certain limits, because otherwise the other will do the same. So I try to stay within certain boundaries. When forces are unbalanced, the stronger one can do whatever they want, because the weaker one is not able to respond with the same strength. And we are experiencing, not far from us, unequal wars where these things happen, where there is an attempt to destroy the identity of peoples by breaking boundaries. This is one of the realities we are living in. The second point on which I would like to draw your attention is that when we experience moments of such drama, we need to return to the fundamentals, to the core points. Look, the core points in my opinion, are not peace and war, but life and death. Today we are surrounded by death. Allow me to say something. When we talk about a truce of 30 or 40 days, do you know what that means? It means whether X people or X more people will die. Whether 50 children or 100 children will die. Whether 2 hospitals or just one will be destroyed. I was very struck by something a Sicilian fisherman told me, that on the seabed of the Sicilian Channel, there are many cases of drowned mothers on the seabed still holding their children. That is death. Iranian girls do not say woman and peace and freedom. They say woman and life and freedom. And the fourth aspect of this reasoning is that I often hear about the dignity of death, but I don't hear about the dignity of life. Why? I have my own personal opinions on the issue of euthanasia. Consider that in Canada they conducted a survey where about 14% of Canadians believe that being poor could be a good reason to request euthanasia. It can be requested and obtained there. In Belgium, euthanasia has also been practiced on children with parental consent, of course. In this sense, I mean, death surrounds us in the sea, surrounds us in wars, surrounds us in a culture that does not take into account the value of life. And there is a point on which I believe we must draw attention. Why does no one talk about the value of life or the dignity of life? Look, even from the perspective of governments. If governments were to establish, let's say, a department of life that included nurseries, schools, health, work, housing, all things that pertain to life. But if you then implement a housing policy that is contrary to the school policy, which doesn't align with the nursery policy, nothing gets done. So, in this sense, I think we need to take control of the threads of life. And here, allow me to say one thing and I'll finish. As I was saying before, as Don Giuliano knows well, with whom we have a certain familiarity in our relationship. Even though there are long intervals where we can't see each other, I am a believer, but I am without religion. I haven't yet found a religion, in short. But of course, I read the texts, I read, study, etc., as much as possible. And in short, the name Satan appears multiple times in the Bible, and it also appears in the Gospels. Satan in Aramaic means the accuser. Then it is Satan. And there is in the Gospel of Luke, if I remember correctly, but correct me. Here, Don Giuliano, at the Last Supper, Jesus says that now remains among you, I am leaving, but that now among you. So, what is the meaning of the covenant? If this covenant is not aimed at making good prevail over evil, because it is not a given that good will prevail. If it were a given, our lives would be, all things considered, quite pointless. In short, life should consist of lending a hand to our Lord as much as possible in a struggle against what is evil. And I believe that today we find ourselves at this moment with all this evil surrounding us. We find ourselves obliged to find the path of good which means recognizing the other, that the other can be a value for me, respecting the other. Here, respect, recognition, are concepts that help to understand the necessity of a relationship with the other. When there is a relationship with the other, there is no war. There is no death. Guys, this is how I interpret the question she posed.
All right. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to a topic particularly dear to me, because it seems to truly touch the nerves of our time, as Professor Violante has listed a series of phenomena that document this change. We see the challenge. It represents for all of us in our constant daily life. It has enlightened me a lot and made me realize the transition. But why have we reached this change of era? What are the phenomena that have occurred in our history that have led to this situation we find ourselves in now, and of all the phenomena we have heard about? For me, reflection, I read from Pope Benedict Ratzinger. It was very enlightening because it described the deep root of the entire phenomenon we have discussed. Not every era where certain things happen can be defined as a change of era. Here we are talking about these fundamentals no longer being shared. So what happened? That after during the previous history of Europe, we all essentially shared, we can say, Christian values in a nutshell. Everything that united us, even amidst wars, plagues, and all the phenomena that continue to occur in history, there was something that kept us completely united as a fabric to face them all, even to recover from all the messes that men made. But at a certain point, there was a success, an event that severely determined a split in Europe, which was the Protestant Reformation. So from there began a struggle among Christians, the famous religious wars, to put it succinctly, which essentially led to the Enlightenment. That is, at a certain point, we Christians got tired of fighting pointlessly, and we had to live together. So what allowed for a common basis to live together? This was essentially the attempt made by the Enlightenment. And Pope Benedict described it in a way that, since I read it, has marked me in dealing with this situation. Pope Benedict says, in the age of the Enlightenment, amidst the opposition of confessions, the religious wars, and in the crisis, that this entailed an attempt was made to keep the essential fundamental values outside of the contradictions and to seek for them an evidence, a strong word, evidence that would make them independent of the multiple divisions and uncertainties of the various philosophies and confessions. That is, despite what had happened, there was still something shared. But as there were divisions, as the different Christian confessions continued, at least the evidence of certain things we had in common remained. And we seek something truly, from a certain point of view, ingenious to save those things that were still recognized among the people of Europe, to save this from these discussions, oppositions, etc. And so Ratzinger says they wanted to ensure the foundations of coexistence and more generally the foundations of humanity. And this was a success, because we could have continued to blow everything up. Instead, the attempt was a success. I had not perceived this value in all its scope previously. At that time, it seemed, pay attention to the words, it seemed possible as the great fundamental conditions created by Christianity largely endured and seemed undeniable. So these things, despite the opposition, the divisions, the wars, all of this remained undeniable. Therefore, there was still a common foundation. Indeed, Kant realizes that to achieve this, it is necessary to create a mode that could be common. What is the common thing when removing the religious foundation, reason? Let's make a religion within the limits of reason. And so, all these values could be recognized by reason and thus form the basis to endure by having this common foundation. But this great condition that still resisted 3 centuries ago, were they able to withstand all the historical vicissitudes from the Enlightenment until now? Their evidence, centuries ago, from the time of the Enlightenment, despite all the divisions, despite all the wars, despite all the possible and imaginable chaos we have seen, they had shown that their evidence, the attempt for their evidence to be outside the discussion of religious confessions, their evidence held up in the face of these historical vicissitudes. Ratzinger's impressively clear response is the search for such reassuring certainty that could remain uncontested outside of all evidence has failed, despite, mind you, all these certainties, values, and principles were recognized by civil law and were consistently upheld in various legal contexts. That is, they were not only religious or of religious confessions. Life, the person, marriage, all these realities that make up the fabric of people's lives remain as they were. But this, almost without us realizing, is what has been emptied. Now we see that the difficulty we find ourselves in is that it's hard to talk, it's hard to share certain things. This has now exploded in front of this situation. For this reason, it seems to me a great insight of Pope Francis, doesn't it? To have identified this as the change of an era. This is why it's so crucial to understand it, to see why fathers don't understand parents with children, teachers with students, one with another. Let's imagine already when other cultures arrive recognizing the value of the other, as was said before, or burning the libraries. All of this is because what has constituted common life for years, for centuries, is not shared. So if to this we add the fact that the great word mentioned by Taylor in the book has happened, secularization, which not only indicates the separation between church and state, as was initially thought, or simply the decline in belonging to churches or Christian denominations. No, what he adds is that there is a third meaning of this word, which consists of the transition we are, that is, before our eyes, from a society where faith in God was not problematic to one where faith appears as one option among many, and often not the easiest to embrace, as he recently said. So we find that what used to be the glue that made communal life still livable, with or without confessions, because they were recognized by reason, this glue is gone. And it becomes one of the many possibilities we have before us. An option among many, which is what we see before our eyes. For this reason, it seems to me, at least this was my sharing this evening, that if we manage to realize, to notice, as the first President Violante said, to notice what is happening, we are already taking a truly important step to understand why we don't understand each other, or why we struggle in the transmission of certain things, because we don't find that common ground that the parents of many young people today had shared. It's no longer there. We don't know the solution yet, but we can understand, be aware, notice what is happening. Because here, the foundation of what constituted common life previously is undermined. And therefore, for this reason, a change of era takes on significance. That we can say the World War, the Second World War, brings about, but even then, this was shared to rebuild, right? Many things. But now the difficulty we have, in my opinion, is this, let's say, foundation, this decline that makes coexistence truly difficult.
So the picture seems clear to me, and therefore we begin to focus on this change of era. Here in the text, it starts with a title, Living in Our Time. So it's clear that within such a perspective on a reality that appears very complex, the question is really also, what is this living, right? Our time. How do you experience it? I will read just a part of the book that helps to introduce this question as well. Living does not simply mean staying and remaining, but it implies a self-awareness of these actions, a taking care of, a relationality that characterizes the way in which a person exists in the world. What distinguishes living from merely staying is therefore a horizon of meaning, because living indicates the place where a self resides. At the root of living is a heart that is continuously reaching out, that is, a heart that desires to meet the other and is not afraid to do so. This happens not because every encounter is peaceful, but because it is the moment to verify an adequate sense of living. It is an opportunity to evaluate and possibly correct the path taken. Therefore, even an uncomfortable, annoying, or even unpleasant encounter can be an opportunity for one's maturation, for the growth of oneself. Please.
It seems to me that it has already been well introduced why we chose this title for the text we are presenting. Because it is not simply about being in the world. It indicated a way of being aware of how we are and live every relationship, every interaction, every way of being, of facing life, work, relationships, affection, illness after life, and death. Therefore, inhabiting our time means inhabiting a time that we have previously described. That is, with all this diversity, where the Posa binding element no longer exists, and we find ourselves with a great diversity that one encounters wherever they go. Earlier we were talking at dinner about the diversity of people coming from various countries to a city like Piacenza, and we already see that it is not as easy to inhabit this city with all this diversity as it was before. I was in Battipaglia last weekend, which was a place where I couldn't imagine there would be such religious diversity as I found there, where a group of people from different religions, invited by Cinzia from Battipaglia, were invited to share this text with all these religious diversities. A Buddhist, a person from a universal religion, I didn't even know it existed, or a Protestant pastor, Catholics. I mean, in Battipaglia, not in Hong Kong or New York. So, everyone gathered, quote, to read the book, giving time, space, availability, listening to each other. And from there, all the questions arose that they then posed to address together in dialogue. I was truly amazed that this approach generated among them a way of relating that didn't exist before. it's indeed an example of how we can occupy our time without opposition, opening up to each other, recognizing diversity, because there is no, and this seems fundamental to me today, there is no access to truth except through freedom. This acquisition of the Second Vatican Council for many Christians, Catholics, is fundamental, because even the thing that happened at the council when the decree on religious freedom was approved, there are still, signs remaining. Why? Because it gave everyone the possibility, the space for each person to discover the value of the truth to which they adhered. Not just one religion had the right, even if it was considered, to propose itself as the truth. Why? Because Jesus entered history and did not impose the truth on anyone. On the contrary, he entered history, and as St. Paul says, he stripped himself of his divine condition and placed himself in reality only with his humanity, with his human diversity, with his attractiveness, leaving to the space of others' freedom the ability to recognize what he was placing in history. Therefore, to inhabit our time is to inhabit it as Jesus himself did, who did not impose himself in any way, but simply bore witness to a way of being in reality that each person must discover, regardless of the religious origin in which one was born. It interests them because they perceive the human convenience of that way of being in reality, of that perspective, that another cannot have. He bore witness. I say this to express what many of us participate in, but each person is called to make the same journey in their own belief, right? Why do we find ourselves in this new situation in our world? What does it mean to inhabit our world? To inhabit our world means to inhabit the world with this diversity, because already, as we mentioned before, what we are discussing is one option among many. And so it is a possibility and a challenge, an exciting time, because it calls each of us who are in search of something that gives certainty to life as we live in this time of uncertainty, which sets us in motion. For this reason, Charles Taylor, one of the authors of the book, says that we are in an era of seekers of meaning. What unites us, just as what united us, unites us with these characters I found in Battipaglia, was the search for meaning. So each of us inhabits this time precisely by meeting with the diversity of others. And so, what can we offer? We can offer our experience to see if the contribution we provide can help our fellow humans we encounter to better understand what it means to live, what it means to face life or death or illness or work, or the struggle of living. Because in this way we can share with others. what each of us has found in life. For this reason, inhabiting our world means inhabiting this diverse world in which we find ourselves living.